We teach everybody at Fair and Farah that the only basis upon which they judge themselves is by the client's success, not your own. This firm has been built over the last 40 years on the trust of our clients, and we intend to keep earning that trust. That's the focus of everybody who works here at Fair and Farah, how they can benefit the client today. Farah and Farah, here for you, here for good.
It's Florida Daily TV, brought to you by FloridaDaily.com. For all your news on politics, business, and education, it's FloridaDaily.com. Now, here's your host, Ed Dean.
Welcome to another edition of Florida Daily TV, brought to you by FloridaDaily.com and our main sponsors, Farah and Farah, personal injury lawyers. Again, go to FarahandFarah.com. Let's do something. Let's stop talking about maybe a lot of these election lawsuits and things going on right now. There was a big thing that happened this past week, and the U.S. House of Representatives passed a major decriminalizing marijuana bill. Here's the latest. Let's see if we got the clips all ready to go. Cage Jackson.
The House has passed a historic bill aimed at decriminalizing marijuana. The MORE Act would remove weed from the federal government's list of controlled substances and put a federal tax on it where it's already legal. Those funds would go to communities with a history of high marijuana arrests. It also removes some criminal records.
All right, with us, Jamie Miller, former executive director of the Republican Party of Florida, one of the best political and media analysts out there, along with another one of the top and best media and political analysts out there, Steve Vancor with Vancor Jones Communications. I want to get into one more clip. I want to break this down because this translates into Florida, what's about ready to take place again. Here is a couple of more of the stories out there on what this decriminalization of marijuana took place from the U.S. House. Here it is.
For the first time on a bill to legalize marijuana at the federal level. Advocates are calling the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act, or MORE Act, the most sweeping marijuana reform bill yet. The MORE Act removes marijuana from the list of federally controlled illegal substances and expunges criminal records of those with marijuana-related federal convictions. It establishes a federal tax on legal weed sales that will fund grant programs to reinvest in communities impacted by high arrest rates and prison time for marijuana offenses.
All right, let's start with you here first, Steve Vancor. Here we go. This is something that didn't seem to get enough move from the judges to get it on a constitutional amendment ballot for 2020. Of course, you know, medical marijuana passed astoundingly. I wasn't surprised, but a good chunk of people supported it back in 2016. This is going to come up in 2022. Now, you heard the ad. That was a nationwide, that was a national bill put out there by the U.S. House of Representatives. Whether or not it passes the U.S. Senate is a different question. This is happening in the states. This is coming back to Florida. Where are we at this momentum for these groups out there? Is this going to be on the ballot in 2022?
Well, we first have to observe that you wanted to get away from talking about counting ballots. That's more controversial than talking about marijuana. Yes, that's the world we live in right now, right? So there's a group that's trying again to get it on the ballot. They failed not because of the failure of the court. They failed because they got in too late and they didn't get enough signatures. Well, those signatures get grandfathered in. They're still alive. They have registered and on file with the state 555,000. The headline in Gannett was ballot measure headed, recreational marijuana headed to the ballot. I'm saying not so fast. Let me tell you why. Two things. One, they probably need to gather up another 500,000 because the threshold has grown from 766 to about 850 now. So they got to get a whole bunch more. They probably need to get about 500,000. The cost of doing so will probably be in the $3, $4, $5 million range. The other problem they have, Ed, is they started gathering their signatures in September. They start expiring coming this September. So if they don't get their signatures done by July, and I can explain why, because there's a 2-month breathe period for the supervisors to validate those signatures. If they don't get them on the ballot, those signatures they have in the can start expiring. They've got to get 850,000 certified by the end of August. That's high thing to do.
All right, let me get Jamie. I want to get back to Jamie Miller. Let's talk about the PR behind this. Is Florida ready for full blown? This is not adding a little extra to Jimmy. Get to Jamie Miller. Not a little extra to medical. This is full blown recreational marijuana. 2022. Jamie, are Floridians ready for this?
Well, I don't know that it's going to have the same intended effect on voter turnout as the previous medical marijuana amendment. You know, for the most part, medical marijuana is pretty low bar threshold to receive your medical card, to go to a medical dispensary and get it. Yeah, there will be some folks who want it recreational. I think, you know, the decriminalization of marijuana would probably have a higher likely of being a turnout mechanism than just recreational marijuana. I believe with Steve, you know, the mechanics of getting this done. But if people decide to fund it to the tune of $5 million, I think they end up getting their signatures by the time necessary to get a ballot question heard by the state Supreme Court. I agree with him that a certain number of those signatures may fall by the wayside, but if they're investing $4 or $5 million, my expectation is that they'll get enough to at least have it heard and go through the process.
All right, Steve, let me ask you a two-part question. First off, could be, you know, as you know, Senator Jeff Brandes is one of the sponsors behind this. You said this on my morning show. There's going to be certain areas of how you look at some of the decriminalization if this starts going through in the legislature coming up in March through May of 2021. Here's the other question. Democrats are behind this. Are Republicans going to get behind this here, Steve?
Well, if you're talking about the legislature or the public?
The legislature, not the public.
The legislature, probably not in the House. The House has been very reluctant to even implement the constitutional provision passed in medical marijuana. They're much more conservative when it comes to, I don't mean politically conservative, just reserved on allowing an expansion of marijuana. In fact, they're moving in the opposite direction. They're looking at a bill to cap THC limits in products, which is a bad idea we've talked about before. So I don't see that happening. Jeff Brandes is kind of an outlier. He's a libertarian in the Senate, really good guy, and his point is completely different. I don't think the House is going to go along with that.
Steve, I asked Jamie the question. I'll ask you. Are voters ready in support 60% for full-blown recreational marijuana in 2022? What do you think?
I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. The bar is not a majority. Now, 5 states have passed recreational marijuana in the 2020 ballot. It was a clean sweep, but only one of them got above the 60% threshold. Florida's electorate is going to be more Republican than it's ever been. We saw a +2 Republican model in the presidential election. It's probably going to be +4. More percentage points Republicans than Democrats in an off-year election with Joe Biden in the White House. I don't see it. I don't see it getting above 60% to go full rec.
Oh, man. Jamie, is this one of these arguments that Steve says, okay, maybe not in 2022? Is it inevitable between now, maybe in 2026, Jamie, that something like full-blown recreational marijuana will pass a constitutional measure in the state of Florida?
Well, I don't know that it'll pass the constitutional measure. I wish there was something I could argue with Steve about, but his comments are, I think, right on point. You know, there is a level of people who support medical marijuana who don't support recreational. There is a little bit of a difference in some things that could happen in the state house. I don't think they really bite on this one. But, you know, there is a generational difference of what we have seen in the past with things like medical marijuana and with really kind of a young guns crowd in the state house. While they're very conservative, they are younger. And so, that conservatism means a little bit of a different thing. I think on full-blown recreational marijuana, I don't think they're ready to take that step, but we could see them take what we'd be seeing a little bit more moderate take on some things. I don't think it goes to decriminalization. I know Jeff Brandes wants to have some sort of justice reform. Those types of a little bit of a more moderate leaning type of thing could pass the state house.
Okay, so let's all of us work in media, and let me throw something out there that's, again, I'm not saying you have to supporting full-blown recreational marijuana. I certainly wasn't a big fan of the medical marijuana amendment too, just because more people on it right now are PTSD, not those on terminal illness out there. Just kind of interesting, but that's okay. When it comes to the recreational marijuana, we have seen hundreds of millions and maybe in a couple of billions. Who knows what our state economic directors and the state numbers may show how much we may be in the South because of COVID and the outbreaks and things like that. So we've got to make up that loss of revenue. Most cities are doing it through raising taxes, sales tax, property taxes, whatever here, Steve. If we're coming around and we haven't really recovered in 2022, the proponents of proponents of recreational marijuana say, let's regulate it, let's tax it. It sounds good. We could use the revenue for schools. It's amazing. Don't do drugs in schools, but we're going to finance it with drugs. Go get that one. Is it possible that this may sell as a benefit to sit back and say, Steve and Jamie, Steve, I'll start with you. We're not going to raise your taxes. We can do it. We can regulate it, and more money will come into the coffers. Could that sell?
No.
Why?
Well, it's quite simply, if you're asking somebody to say, hey, let's do something amoral, and that's where they're coming from, I think Speaker Sprowls would be very much opposed to doing this for moral reasons, to say, hey, Speaker, let's do something amoral to expand the role of government and to pay for government. That's not a sale to a traditional conservative. And I would put Speaker
No, Steve, I'm not talking about the state legislature. I'm talking about selling it as a conservative amendment by proponents of marijuana. They can come back and say, hey, think of all the amount of money we could raise. Some people will buy into that, Steve.
No, they're not going to buy on it. And I think I said this morning because of one word also, which is lottery. The promise that, hey, let's do something you don't agree with so that we can fund government that you really don't understand. The voters still smart from the promise of the lottery was going to somehow repair our schools. They still see billboards up there that say $3 billion towards education, and they don't see improved schools. The public is not going to buy, let's have legal weed as a way to fund government. Now, there's other pathways there, Ed. Let me give you one example. Right now, state attorneys in the state of Florida are not arresting people for less than 20 grams. You could talk about reducing the size of government, reducing the number of people sitting in jails for selling marijuana, small dosages of marijuana. I think that's something that could be very popular. And I think that's something that might actually stand a chance of passing in the legislature. Not full-blown derec, not full-blown recreational, not full-blown decrim, but for those small dosages that are already nobody's arresting over because of the hemp laws. I think something like that is a modest approach that could possibly pass either with the voters and or the legislature.
On the other side, I want to start off with you, Jamie. On the other side of the break, I want to talk a little lightly, a little bit of election aftermath. And do the Democrats have a pathway to win Florida in 2022? We'll do more of this coming up on the other side of the break. Florida Daily TV, brought to you by Farah and Farah, your personal injury attorneys, farahandfarah.com. More on the other side.
When we come to work in the morning, we don't think about all the money we've won against big tobacco, big pharma, or the insurance industry. That's in the past. Life faces forward, and so do we. It's been said, to live in the past is to die in the present. What really matters is what we can do for you and your family right now, right this second. So call us, Farah and Farah, here for you, here for good.
Welcome back to another edition of Florida Daily TV, floridadaily.com for all your news and information, floridadaily.com. Of course, this is brought to you by Farah and Farah, your personal injury attorneys. Go look and check them out statewide, farahandfarah.com. Steve Vancor, media analyst, Vancor Jones Communications. Jamie Miller, state director for one of the other big outfits, peoplewhothink.com. I think we could do one for people who don't think.com. Jamie, we had a big article that came out in Florida Daily this week. I was, after about a certain analysis, kind of let the lawsuits kind of tone down. We did a big story on that Democrats are still in denial of some of their losses out there. For example, defund the police. Some of the other ones, like former Sean Shaw, former Attorney General candidate in 2018 on the Democratic side, says, well, one of the main reasons why Democrats lost was because of all the people leaving the Midwest and states like New York moving to Florida because it's less taxes. I'll throw that one in. There's a small bone. Have Democrats realized that either they didn't show up at the polls, Jamie, or they just couldn't get their message across? And are they in denial what message that they lost on?
Well, I think they lost on a couple things, but one certainly was that they felt like they had a cookie cutter message to their base, and that just simply doesn't work in a state diverse as Florida. When you have Miami-Dade County, I think, is probably what we want to look at the closest, and they have items like defund the police. And for the most part, even if you're a Democrat in bright red Sarasota County where I live, you probably support defunding the police. And so, but in Miami-Dade County, people who would generally vote Democratic they, who are first, second, maybe even third generation Americans, they've lived or they've had a parent or grandparent who have fled communism. And they know one of the first things that happens is there's this chaos that happens. There's a lack of independent policing, and it becomes a military issue, right? So when these coups happen, the police go away and the military steps in for law and order, and then you have the dictators come in after that. They have seen this play out. And they're against it, and they showed that they're against it, and they're going to continue to be against it as long as this becomes a marching cry for Democrats.
We were talking about this in the aftermath. Both of you guys have been on my morning show, and we were talking about that. If you're a Democrat, who do you dislike the most? Do you dislike President Trump, Steve Van Cour, or Ron DeSantis? And I'm thinking, okay, let me think like a Democrat. I probably dislike, I'm not a Democrat, but let's say it would be Trump. So DeSantis would be less disliked, which means if I'm a Democrat looking at what the ramifications of the election results of last month, I'm sitting here, if I'm Nikki Fried or a few others going, it might be safer. I think Nikki's public enemy number one. Democrat, you got to always have somebody to go after. I'm thinking, maybe do I run for re-election for agriculture commissioner, or if things may change, COVID cases, who knows? I mean, could things change in the next year and a half for 2022? The Democrats may see a pathway for the governor's race and a few others in the state of Florida. Steve, what do you think?
Well, they may see a pathway because they're eternally optimistic, despite the fact that they repeatedly steal defeat from the jaws of victory. I do not see a pathway for a statewide Democrat to win for this very simple demographic reasons. Florida continues to become more and more right-leaning. The Republicans out-register the Democrats and new registered voters by 130,000 since 2018. But in an off-year election, that always has for the last 4 cycles, Republicans, irrespective of who's in the White House. But when a Democrat's in the White House, it's even way worse. So you take new voter registration, you take the off-year dynamics, it's going to be a real uphill slog for any Democrat to win statewide. And you're exactly right, Ed. This election, one of the failures, in addition to Jamie was exactly right about the Democrats' misunderstanding of socialism. They hear the word socialist. They thought it was just turning up the dial on liberal. It wasn't. It was cue to Hispanics, Venezuelans, Colombians, Brazilians who came over here. And when you heard defund the police, what they heard was, that's why my family came over here, because the first thing socialists do is they get rid of the local police, right? So the Democrats are in a really, really tough spot because of the demographic dynamics.
Let me interrupt. Jamie, let me give you one more that we did a story on a couple weeks beforehand. Shutdowns. Donna Shalala. We played the clip. You've heard him. Donna Shalala came out in August. One of the few Democrats came out and said, quote, not only do we need to shut down the economy in Florida, she said, quote, we need to shut it down again. And, of course, the media never talked about this. People did not like these mandates and these government shutdowns, primarily in South Florida. I think that's another area where the media hasn't covered that I think hurts some Democrats.
It's a total misunderstanding of the electorate. If you go to the mailbox for your paycheck, if you're Social Security or you're a trust fund kid or whatever it is, where you don't have to leave your house to get your paycheck, you're probably for shutdowns. But if you have to go to work to get your paycheck and you have to go out every day, commute to work, show up to work, and do the work, you need to go work. And so for Democrats to say, listen, we're going to shut this down and remove the ability for you to do your work. And the fact that we have, that we're seeing more and more small businesses, minority-owned businesses that are truly hurt by these shutdowns. The more you're going to have, and most people are employed by small businesses, so you're going to have more and more pushback. And I think you're seeing that right here in Florida.
Jamie, let me throw, with a few minutes left before I get back to Steve, let me throw another thing at you that we think about it. Sometimes it's a little bit too much inside baseball, sometimes the average voter, but there's another reason why Trump won the state. Steve said it. Republicans outworked the Democrats. When they were doing through the COVID shutdowns, Democrats would make some phone calls, but Republicans were knocking on doors. Everybody thinks, well, if Trump won Florida, he should have won Arizona or Georgia. We talked to some of the Trump people off the record. You guys who know who these people are, phenomenal in Florida. It's kind of like you got the map. hey, this is where we need to go. They worked Florida, Jamie. They did not work Georgia that well. Now, we can on another discussion talk about whether or not they should have lowered the areas of how they looked at ballot signatures. I'm all for that discussion. But Florida was harder worked by Republicans and the Trump crowd in Florida than it was in other states. That's another area why Trump and the Republicans did quite well.
Well, and we've worked 20 years. All of that is true. And we've worked 20 years to try to make sure that we have fair, safe, and accurate elections. And so a lot of the things that happen in these other states, I've always said that election fraud is the one place where if you're caught committing the crime, there's no crime. But if you get away with it, there's no evidence. Because once an illegal ballot is cast, it is now a legal vote. And so once that vote is in the pile of legal votes, you're not going to overturn it. And so I think that's kind of one of the things that we've done in Florida is just we put enough mechanisms in place so that you can have a fair mail-in ballot without, things like the ballot being forwarded to out-of-state addresses. That doesn't happen in Florida. In all these other states, things like that can happen.
Well, Steve, I'm going to give you the last word on this. You guys travel throughout the state. You look at election analysis. Some people are still the Trumpers are in denial that there's no way they could have lost those Democratic run swing states. Right. We look back at 4 years ago going, we're surprised you won those states. But Democrats, maybe they think that it was just a bad year. We threw in a third-party candidate to beat Javier Rodriguez. A little party politics. It'll justify that we can win in 2022.
Yeah, here's one other aspect we haven't talked about. I think the Republicans abrogated their responsibility by not passing a platform, just saying we're in with that guy. But the Democrats equally did the wrong thing by simply saying we have become the party of not Donald Trump. And when you have down ballot races and a degree of separation, voters voted. Florida voters tend to be right of center. Republicans won across the board because they weren't Donald Trump. And as much as the Democrats tried to tie every local race to Donald Trump, they failed. And voters came out, Democrats came out and voted against Donald Trump, of course. Trump made huge gains in Miami-Dade among Latinos, mostly South American, third, fourth generation Latinos. And he made pretty good progress. He doubled some of his vote tallies in black precincts across the state. Not big numbers from 3 to 6.
Correct.
Kind of percentages, but those gains translated to 200,000 vote increase.
I want to do a show either in the next few days or so, and we got to write up all of these conspiracy myths. For example, how is it that Joe Biden gets 100,000 more votes than Jon Ossoff in Georgia? But I always ask the question, well, then how did David Perdue end up winning? He got the same amount of votes as Donald Trump. I mean, there are what you guys have talked about. I know 2018 where Ron DeSantis lost counties by 5 points, and Ashley Moody, who is no liberal, won them by 7 to 8 points. It happens. All right. Steve Ancour, thank you for making the time. I got to get Steve booked for like 2 weeks in advance, man. What's up with your agent, Steve Ancour, Ancour Jones Communications. Jamie Miller, as Jamie said the last 20 years, because if he would have said the last 10 years, that means he wouldn't have been included. So that's why he had to get those 20 years when he ran everything. So, Jamie, some of us still think you run everything if you get what I'm saying, considered who's chairman now. So anyway, you like that one. Jamie Miller, both of you, thank you so much for coming on. Another edition of Florida Daily TV. For all of your news, go to floridadaily.com, floridadaily.com. Florida Daily TV brought to you by Farah and Farah, personal injury attorneys. Go to farahandfarah.com. We'll see you next time right here on floridadaily.com.
For over 40 years, I've had the pleasure of seeing Farah and Farah grow from just 3 employees
to a team of over 300 across 15 offices.
And though we've become one of the biggest firms in the Southeast, some things have never changed.
Like how we treat every client who comes through our doors.
And how we believe every case is a big case.
Because since 1979,
we've only measured our success by yours.
Farah and Farah.
Here for 40 years, here for good.